Welcome back to our introductory series on the Simplified Standardized Yang 88 Taijiquan form. We have gotten to part 10 at long last. We've started the second section of the form. We've finished carry tiger to mountain, and now we will be turning around in order to get to fist at elbow's bottom or fist under elbow. So, being the simplified form, and even in the traditional long form, this move isn't particularly complicated, but it is a bit more coily than it first lets on, as you can probably see from the presentation. So we're going to go out to the floor, take a look at what our legs are doing first, and then we'll come back here to take a look at basically what the core and the upper body are doing or trying to do in this move. Main components of this move. You will be shifting your weight, picking your feet up, moving them around, but as you can see, we're staying in the same space. We are just taking some steps in order to reorient ourselves back in that direction in the short term. So just as we've done other stepping before, keep all that in mind for this piece here. It's just that you're kind of stepping in place. So we've got our cloud hands, and then our shift comes with our hand, our leg comes in with our hand comes up, foot comes up, and then begin our step. Our first step is kind of the side. We rotate it like we're opening a door. Sometimes they will say you are opening the door and carrying the pizza through the door. Step through, again, all the way, and then reset this front foot. It's going to end up heel down, as we've done with other empty stances. Same idea. This time our hand comes around to our side, up, threading up through, turn, and settle. Fist under elbow. The key piece here is this sort of internal torsion that you're doing to pull this arm up and then settle it out. Likewise for the other arm, to pull this arm in, up, around, and settle. We'll take a look at that on the wall because it takes a bit more explanation, but that's what you want to be looking at. So let's take a look at the upper body. Lower body, you saw. Upper body, you also saw. But there's some kind of somewhat hidden stuff going on under the surface, mostly to do with core and this sort of coiling motion that Yang style certainly has, but doesn't make quite as obvious as other internal martial arts or other forms of Taiji, such as, for instance, Chen. Chen makes very heavy external use of coiling, where you can see it very visibly, especially through Chen Jiaokui's lineage here. But Yang, you will see it in Yang when you know what to look for, but often it's a bit more, I don't want to say subtle, just not as obvious. This was one move, however, where it is certainly obvious, and it's sort of the first one we see in this sequence of the form where we can't get around that coil, where we just have to talk about it, other than maybe press. I think press has the same type of coil, but it's only there very briefly. In this case, it's sort of the whole second half of the move, getting this rotation, 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 sort of this internal torsion of your core abdominal muscles, twisting and wrapping in order to get your hand to where it's supposed to be. When we are dealing with this sort of coil, the way to practice it and to get decent at it is to first, if you've never done anything like this before, try to just synchronize the motions. You know, you see that our hands are coming out in space doing this motion here. Now you want to think, all right, well, which direction do I move my hips? Just start thinking with hips. Unify hips and shoulders, right? So as we're turning, our hips are coming this way, which helps our hand come this way. And now we want our hands to be coming towards us on the bottom and sort of coming in and wrapping up on the top. So now we think, all right, well, I've turned all this way. I can only turn the other direction. So if I just turn the other direction with the hips, now that can prompt this type of motion here, right? But then I can turn even further and help bring this up, and then I have to turn back into position to bring them around. This sort of, you're not quite unifying these two things by doing this kind of practice, but you're beginning to think in unification of hips and arms. like legs and arm symmetry, hip and shoulder symmetry. These symmetries will at first be purely external, and you won't really get it. You'll just be trying to synchronize the two. But you start with that practice and start with relaxing as you do it, and then you think, eventually, it shouldn't take too long to click, eventually it should start to click that this turning through the hips should be generating the motion up top with the arms. This is a really good movement to do this with, because most of the arm motion in this movement is done from effectively a stationary position. The legs move in this pattern where you're turning yourself around, and then after that, you're just in this empty stance and pulling your hips around, pulling your hips around, pulling your hips around, and settling, finishing. If this is already sort of self-evident to you, if you're already at a level of practice where you've been doing this for a little bit and you're familiar with the form, then the next thing you want to look at is not just how the hips are turning and settling and seating, but actually this motion through the core, where you're sort of lifting your core and pulling in order to drop it as well. Sort of a simultaneous lift and drop in the core, sort of lift through the back, I guess. And this lift, you're like pulling, 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 and then rotating through here as you seat the hips, as you drop and turn and seat the hips, and then settling, thinking that downward motion, that centering downward sensation at the end of the movement to just bring it to the last little position there. That's very important. At the intermediate level, I would say, sort of the early intermediate level, that should be your focus, and thinking of what we've mentioned before about expansion, contraction, and in this move, certainly compression. Remember, compression was linked to the third of the main 4 Taiji postures, the 13 postures, which is press. There is press in this move. It might not be immediately obvious if you've never looked at this move before, but I promise you it's there, and it's your job to find it, because once you find press, the rest of the move starts to come into very clear focus, and all the different things you can do with it. Like I said, we don't usually talk about applications here, which is on purpose, but believe me, you will find the applications. They will present themselves once you see and understand the press and compression at the end of this move, or toward the end of the move. This move is relatively unique in the Simplified Yang catalog of moves because it's dealing with this space right in front, right inside, basically, of you here. Whenever we hold a standing post, right, most of the time, a lot of our motion is happening, for the arm at least, is happening beyond this space in front of us for our standing post. Brush knees are really big out here, single whips all the way out here, or I guess this way, single whips out there. Cover punch is kind of half in, half out, but it's still kind of big, right? This move should be big, it should feel big, but it's coming in closer to you than any of the rest. When we remember our expansion principle, we want to remember that that expansion is going to feel like a stretch. Even though the hands are coming in close to you, you should still feel that stretch. It's just going to be coming around and now in, right? See how big I'm making this as it loops in and comes around? I'm still trying to get that big stretch all through my shoulders and chest in order to finish. So just because the hands are coming close to you doesn't mean that you should be neglecting the expansion principle in your mind. That expansion is pretty much anytime your hands are moving away from you, you should still feel that expansion. And anytime you're even pulling them towards you, it should feel like you're pulling that expansion, pulling that expansive structure and pulling it toward. In this case, as we come around and it starts to come in, we're pulling through, it's like we've attached an eye hook to our elbow, and now we're pulling the elbow toward our core as it's dropped and slipping right through here, come around, and then expanding outward. So that's sort of the simultaneous expansion away and contraction toward, and compression as well. This compression will show itself at the end of the move more so than the beginning. But I think you hopefully catch my drift here. You're trying to not muscle the move like Patrick Swayze in Roadhouse. We don't want to do that. But we also want to make sure that we are not collapsing the move. It's the important part. Just because our arms are coming in close doesn't mean we just sort of, oh, relax, super soft and tiny, like we're just falling into ourselves rather than coming around and expressing sort of that internal expansion. Now, you might be thinking, this move is named fist under elbow. Where have I heard elbow before? The second 4 of the Taiji 13 postures, right? Pluck, rend, elbow, and shoulder, right? Or bump. You're right. That's exactly where you heard it before. It was from the 13 postures. So when we think of elbow, typically when we study martial arts and somebody mentions elbowing somebody or using the elbow, it pretty much always refers to a strike of some kind. Using the elbow to strike the opponent. Coming around, coming in as a pierce, coming up as a strike. And as you can see from this movement here, none of that is obvious in the motion. It does not look obviously like a strike. Keep in mind what I said about every movement in Taiji having at least 3 applications, joint lock, a throw, a strike, and recognizing that very often, usually the case is that one movement will emphasize one of or 2 of these 3 more than another, but that doesn't mean the other isn't there. In this case, the strike with the elbow, you can manifest in certain different ways. Those of you who are martially inclined might look at this move and see much more obviously a possibility for a throw, because there's absolutely one in there. There's 2 in there, actually, by my count. Or several different joint locks. Again, they're in there. When the move is emphasizing 2 of the 3 rather than just 1, it's usually because you're doing one in conjunction with the other. So, you may be performing a joint lock and then putting that person on the ground as a result of the joint lock. That would be kind of counting in both categories. Or sometimes you'll be performing a joint lock and terminating the movement with a strike in some part of the body because the opportunity seems to have presented itself. Or you might be striking somebody in the process of throwing them as part of a throw. A bump, that's usually what a bump is for, shoulder bump in this case. If you're looking for applications in this move, start there. Remember what I said earlier about the press, and remember the elbow. Those are very important in this move. But that's not to say that there isn't some part of the move you could accelerate using some, if you've developed and have an interest in developing Fa Jing, which this form doesn't really play with as much, but if you wanted to put it in there, you could sort of by pressing away because of the internal torsion you have generated for this motion upward, and you can release it like so. I'm not going to talk too much about Fa Jing in this series, as I mentioned before, because this form doesn't really cultivate it, doesn't make you train it, and it looks weird and feels, well, the same when you do the form with special attention to Fa Jing. It's sort of an extracurricular thing for this form, which is kind of a shame, but that's just how the form was developed. So when discussing this internal torsion, especially if you're looking to apply very quick explosive force to it, there might be the temptation to use this torsion internally through the hips and then to sort of try to shoot it out by rolling the spine forward. not recommended. That is suboptimal for this kind of motion. You will see that kind of thing done in external styles as well as practical, not that this isn't impractical, but very practically minded, simple fight mechanics, sort of roll the spine to generate force, usually when you're already on contact with someone, you're trying to get them to come off of you, right? This is going to be different than from that, however. So if we're looking to generate that kind of power, that should be all through here, turn, expand, and settle. Turn, expand, and settle. Notice as we're coming up here, we want to think of that internal drop in order to lift our hands. It's like pulling the shoulder blades down, all the way down to your core. Well, not all the way down to your core, but pulling them down in order to pull the arm to come up. And as you're pulling this down, you're pulling this as well towards your core. That's the internal mechanics. It sounds complicated. It's not. Most of your Taiji postures and movements can be boiled down to things like this. Now, like I said before, this is a relatively unique move in the Yang Simplified catalog for this reason, because you're doing all of this action with the arms being very close to you as opposed to being more further away from you. But you'll find that elements of this move can easily be spotted in other movements, even though the hands are further away from you. This awareness of the internal coil is, one might say, the sum totality of how force is generated and expressed in Taiji, and you'd probably be right. So if you can get it here and then start applying it to the other moves in the form, should be good, should be golden. Expansion, contraction, compression, pressing, and elbow. That's the gist of the move. Remember, as our hand is coming up, we want to think of dropping the core internally, not dropping with our knees, dropping with the core internally to pull this upwards. It's always a pull or a push, and that pull or push is always referring to our frame and our structure, not just our hands and our feet. We want to be thinking of expressing them all the way through our hands or through our feet, or pulling from our feet through our core, but not just thinking of that in an external way where we are dropping down into a squat or pushing out with our hands like a push-up. That's the important piece. So that brings us to the end of fist under elbow. I hope you've gotten something out of this. It's a move that looks very tricky and coilish, but it is coily, but it's not very tricky once you break it down. Remember what we mentioned last time about breaking it down piece by piece by piece, and in this case, synchronize your movements together before you start to try to generate the movements from one position to another. Now, as always, these are not intended to be replacements for proper in-class, in-person instruction. If you're local, feel free to stop by here in bucolic Glen Burnie, Maryland. Otherwise, find someplace that seems to know what they're doing and give it a shot. If there's interest, I might try to expand on what that means for a beginner, but until then, hopefully you kind of know what you're looking for. Now, if you've come this far, thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and I should see you in the next one.